Hey guys, tonight we slip into the echoing marble corridors of Topkapi Palace, where you'd expect courtiers in silken caftans and jeweled turbans. But instead, what pads around your ankles? Cats. Sleek, unconcerned, sun-drowsy cats who know the empire is theirs. You catch the glint of candlelight in their eyes as they wind to the shadows, tails curling around carved columns. And here's your cheeky reality check. If you ever tried running an empire where furballs nap on thrones, you'd probably last about 10 minutes before being clawed out of office. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love seeing where in the world you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander to the palace kitchens, massive spaces where iron cauldrons bubble, feeding thousands of mouths every day. And off to one side, scribes bend over parchment, quills scratching not just about rice and lamb for the janissaries, but meat scraps for the cats. Yes, even in the 16th century, the Ottoman palace had formal registers ensuring cats received their share of the leftovers. The empire's bureaucracy extended down to the paw level, making sure whiskered palace residents thrived. Imagine the files stacked high, ledgers bound in leather, annotated in a careful Diwani script. A clerk mutters about supply allocations, half for the guards, a quarter for the kitchen dogs, the rest for the cats curled smugly on warm tiles. It's oddly familiar, like that time your office manager ordered ergonomic chairs for staff, but also bought custom scratching posts for the office cat. One mainstream historical fact tucked inside here: the Ottomans believed cats in particular held baraka, spiritual blessing, and protecting them ensured divine favor over the palace. And of course, cats weren't just tolerated, they were adored. You pass a scribe's desk, a tabby sprawled right across the parchment, inking paw prints into official correspondence. Did anyone complain? Probably not. The ink smudges became part of the archive. Historians still argue whether these traces should be read as accidents or charming proof of feline co-governance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cats had attendants. Yes, actual attendants. Palace workers whose side duties included grooming, feeding, and coaxing kittens away from delicate silks. You'd think royal cat groomer was an exaggeration, but job roles list tasks that suspiciously resemble it. Picture it. A man in a neat kaftan, chasing a kitten that just knocked over a ceremonial candlestick, while the Grand Vizier tries to discuss military budgets. That's bureaucracy at work. Chaos carefully recorded in neat calligraphy. The soundscape around you is hushed, except for the echo of paws across tile and the low purring from warm corners. Somewhere, a courtier whispers a proverb. Where cats are, no rats dare. Practical, yes, since cats kept food stores safe, but also symbolic, since palace cats guard against spiritual pests. 2. The Ottomans saw their fur companions as protectors woven into both the material and cosmic order. You wander into the harem gardens. Jasmine scents the night air, and cats lounge on marble benches under lanterns. A eunuch gently shoos them away from pecking at trays of sugared almonds destined for the sultana. Again, paperwork hums beneath it. Someone has to record losses. Someone has to sign receipts for replacing almonds eaten by opportunistic paws. Every nibble is logged. This is pet control, not as discipline, but as clerical love affair. And if you lean closer, you hear a joke whispered centuries ago. Palace cats were more secure than soldiers, because soldiers to be dismissed, but a cat who curled up on the sultan's robe? Untouchable. You imagine that moment. A sultan on his golden throne, a striped cat stretched across the embroidery, and no one daring to move it. Even in the empire's most formal moments, cats turn the bureaucracy into their personal playground. Your footsteps echo toward the palace library, where manuscripts gleam under soft lamplight. Cats wander here too, tails brushing over vellum, nibbling at leather bindings. Some marginal notes by frustrated scribes complain of cats gnawing manuscript covers. Others doodle little feline faces into margins, as if admitting defeat. Was this complaint humor, or a sly acknowledgement that the cats were part of the empire's eternal archive? Scholars still debate it. The rhythm of palace life beats on. Viziers arguing over campaigns, janissaries stamping boots in the courtyards, cooks chopping herbs, and everywhere, the low presence of cats, embedded in ledgers and remembered in proverbs. You realize something odd. This was an accident. It was deliberate. Cat bureaucracy ensured continuity. A sultan could rise or fall, but the cats still had their lunch allocation signed and sealed. You know an empire is serious when even its strays are on payroll. By now, the palace air feels heavy. The torches flicker, and you catch sight of one last detail, a gold-embroidered cushion at the base of a throne, occupied not by a human dignitary, but a purring cat. That cushion has its own line in the expense records. The bureaucracy of empire, distilled into a single catnap. And as you linger there, the realization drifts over you. This isn't indulgence, it's infrastructure. Feline governance, Ottoman style. You step away from the marble hush of the palace and wander into the labyrinth of Istanbul streets, where the real empire hums. Lanterns flicker over crooked alleys, bakeries send warm bread smells into night, and every corner is alive with a chorus of barks and meows. Unlike the pampered palace cats, these animals are scrappy survivors. Strays weaving through market stalls, snatching fish heads, and curling up in piles of rugs. But here's the twist. Even out here, amid the chaos, bureaucracy follows him like a leash. You peek over a clerk's shoulder in a small neighborhood office. He dips his reed pen into ink and carefully copies numbers into a leather-bound register. At first you think he's jotting down taxes or census notes. But then you realize he's listing dogs. Yes, street dogs. Their numbers, their territories, sometimes even their markings. Imagine a medieval spreadsheet of tail wags and muddy paws. It sounds absurd, like your local city council holding a meeting just to assign new ID cards to squirrels. But the Ottomans were that thorough, a mainstream historical fact to anchor you here. By the 16th century, Ottoman officials were recording the presence of stray animals in registers similar to those used for households. The logic? Animals shaped the city's rhythm just as much as people did. A neighborhood without dogs was suspicious. Who would keep away the thieves or the rats? And a street without cats risked grain stores vanishing to mice in a single night. The register pages reveal quirky little details. 2 dogs, one white, one with a torn ear, living near the tanner's workshop. You can almost see the clerk sighing as he wrote that down, maybe chased by the very mutts he was documenting. Some notes get whimsical. One cat, striped, often sleeping atop the imam's sandals. You chuckle, bureaucracy with a sense of humor, or maybe just a scribe trying to stay awake on a long shift. And of course, there were debates. Historians still argue whether these records were meant for control, taxation, or simply a reflection of the Ottoman obsession with order. Were officials really planning to tax a one-eyed dog? Or was it more about mapping the city's life? Paw prints included? You might imagine an exasperated bureaucrat in Istanbul muttering, "If it moves, we register it." You turn into a quieter alley, moonlight glinting on cobblestones. There, you catch sight of a man with a sack slung over his shoulder, scattering scraps of bread. At first glance, he looks like a beggar, but no, he's on official duty, paid to feed the strays at certain spots, ensuring they stay predictable, less likely to lunge at fishmongers or terrify children. Picture that. Your empire has janissaries with muskets, but also designated dog feeders with sacks of leftovers. The balance of civilization, wrapped up in bureaucracy and meat bones. There's a soft comedy in it all. Imagine sitting on a city council today and having an agenda item read aloud. Approval of funds for 3 additional chicken bone distributors in the Bayezid quarter. Yet for the Ottomans, this was civic maintenance. If you didn't care for the strays, they multiplied unpredictably, nipped at heels, and made nightly prayers less peaceful. Bureaucracy was the leash that held the street ecosystem in check. And here's a tidbit that makes you pause. Some registers listed animals alongside shopkeepers. A corner grocer, a barber, and then, for dogs, under the bakery awning. It's like the empire was admitting these animals weren't pests. They were residents. Non-human citizens of Istanbul, officially logged. You pass through the bazaar, and the evidence is everywhere. A butcher has a small crowd of dogs sitting politely at the edge of his stall, each tail wagging with bureaucratic precision, as if they know their turn is coming. Cats weave underfoot, tolerated by shopkeepers who know that records and social expectations require them to offer scraps. A night watchman whistles as he tosses bones, the dogs responding like unpaid guards. But not everyone agreed on this cozy system. Some officials grumbled that too much time and ink were wasted on mutts. Others argued it kept peace in neighborhoods, a form of preventative policing, and the debates echo in modern scholarship. Was this care rooted in Islamic ethics about stewardship of animals, or just civic pragmatism? Historians still shrug, pointing at half-torn registers with notes about barking nuisance, resolved with bread. As you drift deeper into the night, the city feels alive with fur, feathers, and faint scratches on parchment. The image stays with you. Scribes bend over candles, documenting creatures that would never sit in a courtroom, never hold land, never pay taxes, yet mattered enough to be cataloged. Somewhere in those crumbling ledgers, a dog with a crooked tail lives forever, filed neatly between a spice seller and a shoemaker. And you realize Ottoman bureaucracy wasn't just about controlling humans. It was about weaving every living thing, stray or sultan, into the tapestry of empire. You slip out of narrow alleys and follow the smoky drift of roasted lamb toward a quieter courtyard, where the air smells not of commerce but of simmering broth. Here, an Ottoman soup kitchen, and the mart hums with activity. You expect beggars lining up for ladles of lentils, and yes, they're there, bowls in hand. But look closer. At the edge of the line, tails wag, whiskers twitch, and wings flutter. Cats, dogs, even the occasional pigeon, waiting with the patience of taxpayers at the DMV. And the wild part? They're not chased away. They're served. Inside the kitchen, copper cauldrons bubble like volcanic pits, tended by cooks with sleeves rolled up. Steam fogs the windows, curling in the lantern glow. A clerk stands to one side, quill poised, noting not only the number of human mouths fed, but also the scraps set aside for strays. Think of it like your neighborhood soup kitchen keeping a separate ledger for raccoons. It sounds ridiculous, but the Ottomans made it policy. A mainstream fact anchors you here. Ottoman Emirates, many funded by sultans or their mothers, were legally bound by charitable endowments, WACs, that often included clauses for feeding animals. That's right. Donors explicitly wrote into the fine print that their money should provide for cats, dogs, and birds. Imagine being a wealthy patron and declaring, "Feed the poor, yes, but don't forget the pigeons." A curious, bureaucratic blend of compassion and paperwork. You shuffle closer to a doorway where scraps are carefully placed outside, forming little piles. Bread crusts, fish bones, lentil mush. Stray cats slink in, grab their share and dart away, while dogs form orderly semicircles, each taking turns. It's both chaotic and strangely dignified. You can't help but grin. It's basically an Ottoman food bank with a very inclusive guest list. And then the quirky tidbit. Some soup kitchens reportedly had animal feeding schedules. Not quite like today's dog walking apps, but close. Records show designated times when staff would set out leftovers specifically for creatures of the street. Picture a bell ringing at dusk and a flood of cats racing in like they're late for a university lecture. Somewhere, a bureaucrat checked a box. Animal rationing complete. But, of course, not everyone approved. There were debates then and now. Historians still argue whether this generosity stemmed from genuine love of animals or a pragmatic attempt to keep the streets clean and disease-free. Was it mercy or management? It's a blurry line, maybe both. You glance at the faces around the kitchen. A baker with flour-dusted hands tossing crust to a one-eyed dog. A veiled woman slipping fish bones into the paws of kittens. The atmosphere hums with quiet satisfaction, as if everyone agrees that feeding strays is part of the city's moral rhythm. And behind it all, bureaucracy hums like an invisible engine. Without the paperwork, the endowment contracts, the expense reports, this whole scene collapses. A small joke whispers to the crowd. Even the cats eat from the Sultan's hand. Exaggerated, yes, but not far from the truth. The kitchens were funded by the empire's wealthiest figures, making strays indirect beneficiaries of imperial favor. Imagine your dog at home being able to boast, Yeah, I'm basically on the royal payroll. You step into the warm kitchen itself, the clang of ladles ringing like bells, steam beads on your skin. At one corner, you notice a parchment pinned to the wall, listing supplies: rice, oil, onions, meat. At the very bottom, in smaller script, for animals, scraps to be distributed. It's so mundane, so routine that you almost miss it. And that's the point. Compassion was an afterthought here. It was itemized. The night stretches on, and as bowls are emptied, you step back into the courtyard. Cats lick their paws under the eaves. Dogs doze with full bellies. Pigeons peck crumbs in little constellations on the ground. For a moment, Istanbul feels like a city where even the smallest creature has a place at the bureaucratic table. You realize that Ottoman paperwork didn't just keep the empire fed. It made sure the streets purred, barked, and fluttered in harmony. And as you wander back into the night, you can't shake the thought. Somewhere in a dusty archive, there's a line in a 16th century ledger that basically reads, "Expenses, lentils, onions, dog bones." That's history for you. Empires rise and fall, but the paperwork always remembers who got fed. You step away from the smoky kitchens and drift toward a quieter quarter of the city. The minarets loom above you like stone needles pricking the night sky, their calligraphy carved surfaces glowing faintly in lantern light. As you draw closer, you notice something perch along the mosque walls. Not gargoyles, not mere decoration, but miniature mansions. Tiny wooden houses, painted bright, with slanted roofs and carved balconies. At first, they look like doll houses glued high above doorways. But when you hear the flutter of wings and the cooing of doves, the truth settles in. These are birdhouses, elaborate, bureaucratically planned habitats for Istanbul's feathered citizens. The Ottomans called them kuskasku, bird pavilions, and they weren't a side hobby. They were part of the empire's architectural and charitable landscape. You tilt your head back and see sparrows darting into the little windows, tucking themselves into safe corners. Below, a caretaker sweeps seeds into small piles, his task written into the daily routine of the mosque's waqf. Imagine your city zoning office today passing laws that every skyscraper must include penthouse condos for pigeons. That's the level of integration we're talking about, a mainstream historical fact. Many mosques, schools, and libraries from the 16th and 17th centuries included permanent provisions for birds. Not only were the houses nailed into walls, but endowment deeds, those bureaucratic whack contracts, sometimes specified funds for grain. Birds had legal line items in Ottoman budgets. And here's your quirky tidbit. The birdhouses weren't just functional. Some were ridiculously ornate, shaped like miniature palaces, with domes and arches echoing the mosque itself. Picture a sparrow flying home each night to a tiny replica of the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, complete with gilded trim. It's the kind of architectural trolling only bureaucrats with too much money and time could dream up. As you stand there, feathers brushing past your cheek, you overhear a scholar muttering about the symbolism. Historians still argue whether these birdhouses were purely acts of compassion or whether they projected imperial propaganda, a subtle way of saying even the smallest creatures are sheltered under Ottoman order. Maybe both. The paperwork didn't just build shelter, it built a message. You drift further around the courtyard. The mosque's fountain gurgles softly, and cats lap from the basins while doves roost above. A caretaker's ledger sits open on a bench. Lists of purchased grain, notes on maintenance of birdhouses, even records of repairs. One entry catches your eye. Repainted bird pavilion, cost 3 silver. You chuckle. Bureaucracy at its most adorable. Someone's annual review must have included. Birdhouses maintain on schedule. And because every bureaucracy breeds jokes, you hear one from a passing worshiper. These birds live better than I do. A bit of gallows humor from someone paying high market taxes, while pigeons get palaces. Yet the humor reveals a truth. Ottoman bureaucracy embraced animals with a seriousness we rarely match today. The city hums around you. The call to prayer floats overhead, mingling with the coos of pigeons and the rustle of feathers. For a moment, it feels like the whole empire breathes in rhythm with its creatures. Bureaucracy isn't cold or lifeless here. Its warm wood tiny balconies, and legal ink ensuring sparrows find shelter against the rain. As you walk away, the moon catches on a particularly elaborate birdhouse jutting from a wall, a miniature Seljuk fortress, complete with battlements, but size for finches. You grin, realizing this is an indulgence. It's policy. A scribe once inked a line, a donor once signed a deed, and now centuries later, a bird still tucks itself into a bureaucratically guaranteed bed. That's Ottoman compassion, sealed in timber and parchment. You leave the mosque courtyards behind and step into the din of Istanbul's open streets, where the night is rarely quiet. Dogs bark at shadows, vendors shout over one another, and donkey carts creak to the cobblestones. The city is alive, but also on edge, because animals roam everywhere, too many, some say. And where there's chaos, there's paperwork trying to contain it. Tonight you stumble into one of the empire's less glamorous innovations, dog taxes and patrols. Picture it. A clerk hunched over a desk, tallying not the spice trade or janissary pay, but fees from neighborhood dog owners. Yes, dog taxes were a thing. Small levies collected to help manage the city's overflowing canine population. It's like a medieval version of dog licensing. Except instead of fancy collars, compliance came in the form of scribbled receipts. Imagine an Ottoman dog proudly wagging its tail, because technically, it's a taxpayer. One mainstream historical fact anchors you here. Ottoman authorities periodically introduced dog taxes in parts of Istanbul during the 18th and 19th centuries, especially as the stray population ballooned. The income was supposed to fund feeding programs and, more importantly, patrols to keep the streets safe. Did every Aki collected make it to dog biscuits? Probably not. Bureaucracy is bureaucracy after all, but the idea itself reveals just how seriously the empire took its four-legged neighbors. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Patrolmen weren't just guards. Some were literally hired to walk circuits with sticks, tapping the cobblestones to scatter packs of strays away from main thoroughfares. You can almost hear it now. The soft talk of wood on stone, followed by a chorus of startled barks as dogs shuffle back into side alleys. These men weren't dog catchers in the modern sense. They were more like street shepherds, guiding the canine flow as if it were traffic. Of course, not everyone thought this was wise. Historians still argue whether the dog tax was truly enforced or mostly theoretical. Some say it was an Ottoman attempt at European-style urban control. Others insist it was just another ledger entry with little teeth behind it. And residents often resisted, claiming the dogs were guardians of their neighborhoods and shouldn't be taxed for doing their jobs. Imagine trying to tax your local security guard while still expecting to protect you. It didn't go over smoothly. You follow patrol down a dimly lit street. The lanterns throw shaky circles of light, revealing dogs lounging like kings in doorways. The patrolman nudges one with his stick. It grumbles but moves. Another pack perks up as fish scraps are tossed their way, a small bribe to keep them calm. It's strangely organized, like an unspoken contract between humans and dogs. You stay fed, we stay safe. The city jokes about it, of course. A fishmonger mutters, "Dogs pay more tax than my brother-in-law," while a boy snickers at a mutt being shooed along like a delinquent student. But beneath the humor lies a serious truth. The bureaucracy wasn't about hating animals, but about channeling their energy. Stray dogs could be guardians, or they could be chaos. Paperwork decided which. And if you listen carefully, you catch the weary sigh of patrolman as he counts the packs he's moved tonight. Maybe tomorrow he'll jot them into a notebook. 7 dogs, 1 white, 3 brown, 3 black, removed from fish market. You imagine that scrap of paper joining thousands of others in some forgotten drawer. Bureaucracy at its finest. Neither grand nor glorious, but strangely intimate, remembering creatures no one else would bother to count. You pause in a square where several dogs sprawl in the moonlight, bellies full, tails flicking lazily. Behind them, a guardhouse door creaks open, revealing another ledger with neat lists of fines, taxes, and patrol routes. The handwriting is precise, almost tender. It hits you then. Even management of barking mutts could become part of the Empire's grand machinery. The night closes around you, but the echo of those wooden sticks tapping on stone lingers. Dog patrols, half discipline, half caretaking, were the Ottoman compromise. Not extermination, not neglect, but bureaucratic choreography, turning snarling packs into part of the city's rhythm. And somewhere in a dusty archive, a line of ink still whispers the evidence. Tax received, patrol dispatched, peace restored for now. The streets grow quieter as you wander deeper into Istanbul, lanterns flickering low, the smell of roasted chestnuts fading behind you. You follow the sound of voices into a small wooden building where men sit cross-legged, their turbans slightly askew, quills scratching on parchment. At first glance, it looks like any local court session. Neighbors quarreling over fences, debts, or stolen chickens. But as you take a seat on a rough bench, the next case begins, and suddenly you realize this is pet control Ottoman style. The Qadi, a judge wrapped in layered robes, strokes his beard as two neighbors argue in front of him. One accuses the other's rooster crowing too early, hours before dawn, disturbing his prayers and making his children cranky. The other insists roosters have no curfew, and besides, the family depends on its eggs. It's absurd, like watching Judge Judy mediate a poultry feud. Yet the atmosphere is utterly serious. Clerks scribble every detail, turning feathers and noise into legal precedent. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman courts really did hear cases involving animals. Records survive where qadis issued rulings on disputes about wandering goats, destructive donkeys, and noisy poultry. The empire's legal system, built on Islamic law and centuries of precedent, left space for the smallest disruptions of daily life. And the paperwork? Meticulous. Even the fate of a stubborn rooster was inked into court archives. The quirky tidbit? Some litigants got very creative. One story tells of a man suing his neighbor's goat because it had eaten his laundry off the line. Imagine standing in court while a bleeding defendant chews on the evidence. The scribe must have rolled his eyes while dutifully recording, "Goat, guilty of chewing garments." Bureaucracy spares no one. Of course, historians still argue whether these cases reveal deep compassion for animals or simply the Ottoman obsession with order. Were goats and roosters treated as legal subjects, or were they just property disputes wrapped in barnyard drama? The line is blurry, but the paperwork suggests that, at least in practice, animals occupied a strange middle ground. Not fully citizens, not mere objects. You lean against a wall and watch another case unfold. A fisherman claims that a neighbor's cat keeps stealing from his drying nets, carrying away shimmering sardines. The neighbor insists the cat is a free agent, not his responsibility. The qadi listens patiently, then orders a man to compensate the fisherman in grain. Why grain? Because it could be set aside to feed the cat, reducing temptation. That's Ottoman justice for you. Half legal ruling, half pet training advice. In the margins of the clerk's notes, you see tiny doodles. A rooster, a goat, a paw print. Was the scribe bored? Or maybe he found it easier to identify cases by sketching little icons. Either way, it adds a human touch, a reminder that even in solemn courtrooms, humor fluttered at the edges. The room buzzes with whispers. People debate whether the rooster ruling was fair, or whether cats should really be blamed for acting like cats. Someone jokes, soon the dog will sue the fishmongers for stingy scraps. Laughter ripples, but only briefly. The court remains businesslike, grinding forward. You realize these proceedings weren't trivial to the people involved. They shaped daily life, sleep schedules, and neighborhood peace. Outside, you catch the cool night air again, the stars sharp above the domes. Yet you carry with you the image of that courtroom. Parchment filled with ink, clerks huddled over benches, and neighbors arguing passionately about creatures who never said a word. The Ottomans didn't ignore their animals. They regulated them, debated them, and inscribed them into the machinery of law. You imagine a rooster crowing defiantly outside the court window as the qadi dismisses the session, scribes tucking away yet another case file marked resolved. Somewhere in an archive, that rooster's fate still rests on a shelf, a legal memory preserved long after bird itself vanished into stew. That's bureaucracy for you, turning everyday animal squabbles into history. You drift onward through the city, past the shuttered shops and the clatter of hooves on stone, until you reach a courtyard filled with quiet murmurs. Oil lamps flicker over a low building, and through its open door you glimpse rows of scribes bent over desks. Here lies the beating heart of Ottoman compassion with a clerical twist. The animal waqf, charitable endowments created not for people, but for creatures who never once signed their names. You slip inside. The room smells of parchment and melted wax. A scribe straightens his back and reads aloud from a deed. This estate, of 2 vineyards and 1 bakery, is hereby dedicated to the care and feeding of cats in the Uskadar quarter. You blink. A vineyard turned into a cat food trust fund. The Ottomans took generosity, stamped it with bureaucracy, and locked it into perpetuity. Here's your mainstream fact. Wax were the Ottoman Empire's charitable backbone. Wealthy patrons endowed properties whose income funded mosques, fountains, schools, and yes, animal care. Some endowments explicitly stated that their revenues must purchase meat scraps for dogs, wheat for pigeons, or hay for old workhorses retired from the caravan routes. In a world before retirement homes for humans, horses had pensions. The quirky tidbit comes in the details. One surviving deed describes a patron who ordered weekly distributions of liver for cats at a particular mosque. Liver, specific enough to make you wonder if the donor had a favorite tabby with expensive tastes. Another endowment paid for a caretaker to scatter grain on rooftops every Friday, ensuring pigeons were fed during prayers. Bureaucracy made compassion a ritual, not an accident, but not everyone agreed this was wise. Historians still argue whether such animal waqfs were acts of genuine kindness or displays of social prestige. Was it philanthropy or virtue signaling written in Diwani calligraphy? Some modern scholars suspect wealthy patrons loved the moral credit these endowments brought, ensuring their names were remembered every time a dog wagged its tail in the bazaar. Yet whether motivated by piety or vanity, the paperwork held. Animals ate because ink demanded it. You trace your fingers along a ledger where revenues are tallied. Bakery rent, 12 silver. To grain for pigeons, 6 silver. To cat meat, 4 silver. To maintenance a birdhouse, 2 silver. Every line item precise. Each paw print translated into currency. Imagine your modern budget spreadsheet with Netflix next to kibble for stray cats. That's how Ottoman bureaucracy operated. Compassion as accounting. Step outside, and you see the waqf in action. A caretaker tips a sack of grain across the mosque courtyard. Birds flutter in clouds, settling in a frenzy of wings. A pair of cats circle his feet, tails weaving like ribbons. Behind him, neighbors nod approvingly. He's not just feeding animals. He's fulfilling a sacred trust backed by legal ink and divine reward. The atmosphere is oddly solemn. You half expect a procession, maybe even prayers, because the feeding isn't random charity. It's structured, official, part of the city's moral and bureaucratic rhythm. A passerby jokes. Even cats file petitions in the city. You laugh, but it rings true. In the Ottoman imagination, every creature had a right to sustenance, and waqf clerks were their unlikely lawyers. You linger at the edge of the courtyard, watching a boy carry a basket of scraps marked for dogs. He deposits them in neat piles, then runs back to his master for a nod of approval. Somewhere in an archive, this act is mirrored in ink. Wages paid to caretaker for feeding strays. The boy doesn't know it, but his small task is immortalized in bureaucracy. And then you realize, the Empire's paperwork didn't just track armies and taxes. It recorded the soft heartbeat of compassion. The ink preserved the flutter of wings, the scrape of claws, the slow chewing of a retired mule. It turned generosity into permanence. The lamps burned lower, casting gold halos on the courtyard stones. Cats lick their paws, pigeons coo from their rooftop mansions, and the ledger books inside close with a soft thud. Tonight, bureaucracy feels less like red tape and more like a lullaby, promising that even the smallest creatures won't be forgotten in the Empire's vast machinery. You follow the cobbled lanes into a darker stretch of the city, where the usual laughter taverns and the clatter of hooves has fallen away. The air smells sharp, sour, like sickness. People whisper nervously. Doorways shuttered, and for the first time you feel the shadow side of the Ottoman animal bureaucracy. Tonight, the ledgers don't describe feeding programs or birdhouses. They describe removal. Epidemics always stalk cities, and Istanbul was no exception. When plague or rabies struck, blame often landed on the creatures who roamed the streets most visibly: dogs. You round a corner and glimpse a town crier shouting an edict, his voice echoing over the rooftops. By order of the Sultan, the strays shall be gathered and sent away. The crowd murmurs, some nodding in relief, others frowning, clutching the cats curled in their arms. Bureaucracy, usually gentle with its paw prints and grain tallies, suddenly feels like a whip. Here's your mainstream fact. During the 19th century, Ottoman authorities did indeed organize mass relocations of dogs, often shipping them to uninhabited islands in the Bosporus. Kenaliata and Sivriata became infamous as canine exile zones, where thousands of animals were deposited. The policy was defended as public health, part of broader modernization campaigns. And the quirky tidbit? Some accounts describe officials paying boatmen per head of dog transported, leading to absurd disputes over whether puppies counted at half rate. Imagine haggling in a harbor over the invoice. That's 12 and a half dogs, sir. Even tragedy couldn't escape Ottoman bookkeeping. Yet the deeper question gnaws. Historians still argue whether these campaigns were truly about disease prevention or whether they reflected political anxieties. Was the bureaucracy responding to rabies outbreaks, or was a symbolic gesture to show Western diplomats that Istanbul was becoming a modern city? Some scholars insist it was more about image than health. Animal control is theater. You edge closer to the waterfront, lanterns bobbing on the waves. Dogs bark as they're herded into boats, their voices echoing across the dark water. Some residents weep openly, tossing scraps of bread after the vessels, as if parting with family. Others mutter relief, glad to see the menace gone. It's heartbreaking, yet it's wrapped in procedure. Lists of dogs, payments to handlers, official seals stamped on orders. Even sorrow must be filed. The city's humor, usually resilient, cracks under the weight. A shoemaker jokes weakly. At least the dogs will finally live in palaces. Stone palaces of silence. Nobody laughs. Bureaucracy, usually protective, has turned cold, and everyone feels a chill. And yet, there are contradictions. Just a few streets away, Imarads continue ladling soup for cats. Birdhouses still cradle sparrows, and waqf caretakers scatter grain. The empire never abandoned compassion entirely. It just shifted the balance in moments of fear. You realize Ottoman bureaucracy wasn't one thing. It was a pendulum, swinging between nurturing and controlling, depending on the pressures of plague, politics, and perception. As the night deepens, you stand on the seawall, the moon throwing silver across the Bosporus. You can almost see the silhouette of an island, faint in the distance. Out there, dogs howl in the dark, their voices drifting faintly toward the city that banished them. And you know, centuries later, historians still argue over that sound. Was it the echo of necessary public health, or the empire's most haunting bureaucratic mistake? You drift back inland, away from the dark shimmer of the Bosporus, and slip into the crooked streets near and in where lanterns sway on iron hooks. The voices you hear here aren't Turkish but French, Italian, and English. Foreign visitors, merchants, and diplomats cluster around tables, sipping coffee, jotting notes in travel journals. And if you listen closely, you hear what amazes them most. Not the sultans, not the domes, but the animals. Istanbul, to their eyes, is a city where strays have bureaucratic rights. One traveler waves his arms dramatically. Mon Dieu! They build palaces for birds. Another scribbles furiously about dogs lounging in the middle of traffic, undisturbed, as carriages and janissaries simply flow around them. You smile at the irony. Europeans expecting filth and cruelty, but instead finding an empire that files paperwork for pigeons. Here's your mainstream historical fact. European travelers in the 16th through 19th centuries left astonished accounts of Ottoman kindness toward animals. They noted the dog feeding programs, the birdhouses, and the Imarat scraps, often contrasting them with the harsher treatment of strays back home. In Paris or London, strays were culled. In Istanbul, they were fed. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some visitors mocked it mercilessly. One British officer wrote that the Ottomans treated curs better than Christians. Another Italian traveler claimed the cats of Istanbul were aristocrats, lording over the streets while men bowed to avoid stepping on tails. Satirical sketches even circulated in Europe. showing sultans surrounded by dogs carrying tax receipts in their mouths. The empire's animal bureaucracy became both a curiosity and a punchline abroad. Yet beneath the mockery was something harder to dismiss. Historians still argue whether these foreign accounts were exaggerations, Orientalist caricatures meant to depict the Ottomans as absurdly indulgent, or whether they captured a real ethical divide. Were Europeans projecting their own anxieties, or genuinely recording practices that shocked their sensibilities? The debate lingers, ink against ink, journal against archive. You lean against the doorway, eavesdropping as a Venetian merchant recalls seeing clerks distribute bones to dogs by the harbor. He shakes his head. Our city spends gold on cannons. There spends silver on cats. His companions chuckle, but one nods gravely, admitting there's wisdom in such priorities. A city without kindness, he murmurs, is poorer than it knows. Step outside, and you see these impressions firsthand. A pack of dogs sprawls in the middle of the plaza, bellies up to the stars. Carriages steer around them without complaint. A French traveler gawks. In Paris, we'd whip them from the street. Yet here, the bureaucracy has shaped a different culture. Paperwork, taxes, and endowments have normalized tolerance, even respect. It's not chaos, it's regulation with a soft edge. You chuckle to yourself, imagining the guidebooks these visitors would write. Tip for travelers: do not insult the cats. They hold senior office. Warning: dogs have right of way in Istanbul. Somewhere in Europe. Readers must have shaken their heads, half in disbelief, half in envy. The night thickens, and as the foreigners retreat to their lodgings, you realize their astonishment isn't trivial. Through their eyes, the Ottoman animal bureaucracy appears surreal, an empire that gave ledgers and laws to creatures others saw as vermin. It unsettled assumptions about civilization itself. And centuries later, those accounts still ripple through scholarship, a reminder that sometimes what seems laughable is also what's most humane. The streets begin to thin as dawn edges the horizon, the lanterns paling against the first wash of pink light over the domes. You find yourself back near the palace, where the whole city's rhythms, dogs, cats, pigeons, people, seem to converge. A janissary yawns at his post. A baker's oven glows orange with rising bread, and in the gutters a few stray dogs nose through scraps left out overnight. This, you realize, is where the Ottoman obsession with paperwork truly shines. Not in the spectacular, but in the ordinary, where every creature fits into the empire's daily machinery. You peek over the shoulder of yet another scribe, seated on a low stool with parchment across his lap. He's not chronicling wars or decrees, just neighborhood matters, rent collections, grain distributions, even notes on feeding animals. The ledgers you've glimpsed all night come together here like threads in a loom. Bureaucracy was the empire's attempt to weave harmony, and animals, improbably, were part of the pattern. Here's the mainstream fact anchoring you. Ottoman bureaucracy was famously vast, stretching from palace scribes to local imams, and it recorded everything: taxes, disputes, weather patterns, and yes, animals. Stray dogs were listed alongside households. Bird houses were maintained through wax stipulations, and courts preserved cases of crowing roosters. The inclusion of animals wasn't a side quirk. It was systemic, embedded in how the empire defined order. And for your quirky tidbit, there are scattered anecdotes of scribes adding whimsical commentary and margins, jokes, doodles, even prayers for the well-being of particular animals. One surviving note reads, "The dog by the tannery barks all night. May God grant rest." Equal parts frustration and blessing, etched in ink for posterity. Historians still argue whether this legacy reflects deep ethical commitment or simply a pragmatic obsession with controlling the uncontrollable. Were the Ottomans uniquely compassionate or just uniquely thorough? Did paperwork reveal empathy, or was it merely the empire's way of tidying chaos into columns? The debates circle endlessly, but the records themselves remain silent and stubborn. You walk past a fountain where cats crouch to drink. An old woman scatters crumbs of pigeons, her hands practiced, the gesture almost liturgical. A boy tosses bones to the dogs, laughing as they scramble. None of them are officials, yet all are participants in a system shaped by centuries of ink and law. Bureaucracy may have codified compassion, but it was ordinary people who kept it alive each dawn. The city exhales as morning takes hold. You glance once more at the domes and minarets gleaming in gold. The sparrows darting into their tiny carved mansions, the dogs curling back into sleep on warm stones. The Ottomans may be gone, but their bureaucratic kindness lingers in these small rituals, woven into Istanbul's soul. And as you let the scene soften in your mind, you realize that history isn't only battles and treaties. It's also the quiet paperwork of compassion, signed and sealed for cats, dogs, and pigeons alike. So now, as the sun rises fully over the city and our long wander comes to its close, let the noise of the Ottoman streets fade gently into background hum. The barking, the cooing, the scratching of quills on parchment, all of it softens into a kind of lullaby, a reminder that even the most powerful empires are made not only of steel and stone, but of ink and kindness. Picture the ledgers closing one by one, their pages fluttering shut like wings. The scribes set down their quills, the caretakers lean against their empty sacks, and the courts fall silent after another day of rooster disputes and goat complaints. Slowly, order dissolves into stillness, and all that remains is the steady rhythm of the city at rest. Breathe in, and imagine the smell of warm bread drifting from the bakeries. Breathe out, and feel the cool Bosporus breeze washing the streets clean. Dogs curl tighter in doorways, cats stretch luxuriously along marble steps, and sparrows nestling in their wooden palaces. Everything slows. Everything softens. You may still hear faint echoes, the tap of patrolman's stick on stone, the flutter of pigeons fed by a careful hand, the laughter of travelers surprised at such gentleness. But even those sounds grow distant, wrapped in velvet quiet, like memories settling into sleep. Let yourself drift with them, carried by the notion that somewhere in history, bureaucracy was not a burden, but a blanket. A city cared for creatures, and in that small miracle you find calm. The lights dim, the ink fades, and Istanbul, with all its paw prints and paperwork, sighs into silence. Good night.